For, well, basically over a century, the greatest sports coaches in the world relied on really just one primary tool to build champions.
Right, their eyes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is this deeply romanticized mythology, right? You picture the grizzled veteran coach standing on the driving range, arms crossed, watching a player hit like a single shot and instinctively knowing exactly what went wrong.
That's a classic image, yeah.
It really is. But what happens when human biology hits an absolute limit? Like, what happens when a sports movement occurs so fast, we're talking processing in mere milliseconds, that your eyes are actually, lying to your brain about what just happened?
Well, the entire foundation of coaching authority starts to fracture. I mean, we are really entering an era where the naked eye is just no longer sufficient.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah, but human biology simply cannot process visual information fast enough to diagnose the invisible forces acting on an athlete's body. We're shifting from an art form based on intuition to, well, a hard science based on empirical measurement.
Absolutely. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are exploring an incredibly revealing update and announcement from Henrik Jentsch.
Yeah.
He's a PGA professional who has basically spent the last 2.5 years producing daily content focused strictly on modern golf instruction, performance, and technology. And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore the profound friction point his journey has exposed.
And it is a massive friction point.
Right. Because we are looking at a coaching landscape that is moving aggressively toward high-tech movement analysis, which is kind of leaving traditional visual instruction in the dust. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here is that documenting this industry for 2.5 years is essentially mapping the growing pains of a sport in the middle of a paradigm shift.
Yeah, for sure.
Henrik has been entrenched in this daily, engaging with professionals around the globe, and he has identified this massive psychological hurdle. Coaches are, frankly, intimidated.
Oh, I bet.
The technology is advancing way faster than the education required to actually understand it.
Right, so let's look at the psychology behind that intimidation for a second. Because a traditional golf coach has built their entire reputation and, their livelihood on having a good eye.
Exactly. Their authority comes from being the person on the range who can diagnose the flaw and just prescribe the fix.
Yeah, and then suddenly you drop a high-tech launch monitor, 3D motion capture suits, and ground force plates onto the tee box. The whole power dynamic is completely disrupted.
It's a huge shock to the system.
The coach goes from being the ultimate authority to staring at a screen of raw data, feeling like an absolute beginner again. It's like giving a classical musician a state-of-the-art digital synthesizer.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Like the potential is huge, but without a manual, it's just an intimidating box of buttons. But let me ask you this. Shouldn't a good coach be able to just look at a swing and know what's wrong? Why is visual interpretation suddenly no longer enough?
Well, it goes back to those physical limitations we touched on earlier. A modern golf swing takes roughly 1 second from takeaway to impact, but the critical transition moments happen in fractions of a millisecond. The human eye processes visual info and sends it to the brain at a rate equivalent to maybe 20 to 60 frames per second.
Wow, that's it.
That's it. So the downswing is moving significantly faster than the human optical nerve can accurately record.
So the eyes are essentially dropping frames.
Yeah.
They are missing the absolute most critical moments of the action.
Missing them, or worse, misinterpreting them entirely. The naked eye is incredibly vulnerable to optical illusions and physical compensations.
How so?
Well, let's say a coach watches a player slice the ball. The coach sees the player's hands flip wildly at the exact moment of impact. So the brain rationalizes this visual data and concludes, oh, the hands are too active, so the hands are the problem.
Right, that makes logical sense.
Right, and then the coach spends weeks trying to fix the player's hand position.
But the technology tells a completely different story, doesn't it?
A radically different story. A 3D motion capture system reveals that, say, 40 milliseconds before impact, the player's hips entirely stopped rotating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The hands flipping wasn't the disease. It was merely a symptom. It was just an involuntary neurological reflex by the brain to try and save the shot because the body had basically stalled out.
So the eye just saw the survival mechanism, but the tech saw the root failure.
Exactly. The coach was treating the wrong problem entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Henrik uses a brilliant analogy in his update to clarify this exact distinction. He points out the massive difference between a thermometer and a complete body scan.
Which perfectly illustrates the current trap a lot of modern coaches fall into.
Right. Because a lot of professionals think they're at the cutting edge simply because they purchased like a $20,000 launch monitor.
Yeah, they think the tool itself is the answer.
Exactly. But ball flight tracking systems, as incredible as they are for mapping spin rates and carry distances, they really only provide the final result. Henrik says this is comparable to a thermometer.
Yeah, that's such a great comparison.
It measures the temperature. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that you have a fever of 102 degrees, but it offers absolutely zero insight into why you're sick.
The ball flight tracker only tells you what the golf ball did after it separated from the club face. It proves you are slicing the ball and exactly how many yards off-center it landed, but it remains completely blind to how your body organized itself to actually create that slice.
So to understand the why, you really need the body scan. You need to map the internal mechanics of the organism.
Precisely.
And this brings us to two terms that get thrown around a lot but are rarely actually defined, kinematics and biomechanics. Because if we are replacing the coach's eye with hard data, we need to understand what we're actually measuring.
Yeah, and the distinction is vital for anyone trying to navigate this space. Kinematics is the geometry of motion.
Right.
It looks at what things look like in three-dimensional space through angles, rotational speeds, the exact sequencing of the body parts. It's basically the ultra-high-definition video of the movement.
Got it. And biomechanics.
Biomechanics, on the other hand, deals with the invisible forces that actually produce those kinematic motions. This is your ground reaction forces, the push, the pull, the torque, measured by force plates under the player's feet.
Okay, so biomechanics is the force being created, and kinematics is how the body shapes that force in space.
That kind of makes me think of a car transmission.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like the engine representing the ground reaction forces in biomechanics can generate all the horsepower in the world by pushing against the asphalt. But that power has to travel through a complex transmission system before it ever reaches the tires. In a golf swing, the body's kinematic sequence is that transmission.
That is an excellent framework. Henrik refers to this as the chain of movement and energy transfer. In a highly efficient swing, energy is generated from the ground up.
Right.
The player pushes into the earth, that energy travels up through the legs, rotates the pelvis, transfers into the torso, channels down the arms, into the shaft of the club, and finally just explodes into the club head. But if there is a blown gear in that transmission, say a severe restriction in the player's thoracic spine, the power stops right there.
Right.
It leaks out.
Exactly. It never reaches the tires, or in this case, the club head. The thermometer, the launch monitor, just reports that the car is driving 20 miles per hour slower than it should.
Yeah.
But the body scan, the kinematic and biomechanical data points to the exact gear in the torso that failed 50 milliseconds before impact.
Which shifts the focus entirely from treating the club face to treating the body's organization. You are no longer applying bandages to symptoms. You are engineering the root mechanics of human movement.
Which is so powerful.
It really is. So if we're mapping the exact transfer of energy from the body to the club, does this mean the era of quick-fix swing tips is officially dead? There's classic magazine articles that promise you can cure your slights just by moving your thumb half an inch to the left.
Oh, the data absolutely proves those quick fixes are biologically counterproductive. Moving your thumb might artificially close the club face, temporarily masking the slice, but it leaves the underlying biomechanical sequencing flaw completely untouched.
You're just hiding the problem.
Exactly. You cannot isolate and change one tiny piece of the swing without causing a chain reaction through the entire kinetic chain. Everything is fundamentally interconnected.
But if a coach translates this complex data into a lesson, what is the process for the coach to actually learn all this? We established early on that the tech is intimidating and causes cognitive paralysis.
Yeah, knowing you need an MRI machine is very different from knowing how to read the MRI results.
Exactly. And that knowledge gap is precisely the friction point Henrik's new platform is designed to eliminate. He is launching a brand new educational platform called eCoach 360 Degrees, aimed directly at PGA pros and elite amateurs who need to master this data.
It's a huge step forward for the industry.
It really is.
Yeah.
And their flagship program is the 30-day Golf Biomechanics and Kinematics Certification course. Henrik outlines that the complete program contains 12 hours of highly structured, deep dive education.
And there's a pretty significant pricing incentive too, right?
Yeah, there is. The course normally costs €585, but early supporters and podcast listeners can get it for €300 by sending an email to receive a personal coupon code and landing page link.
That's a great deal.
But beyond the logistics, the pedagogical structure of this course is what really demands attention. It takes those 12 hours of dense science and purposely organizes them into a 30-day learning system to make complex data easier to apply and teach.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the architecture of that 30-day window reveals a deep understanding of adult neuroplasticity and motor pattern recognition.
Right.
You cannot just dump 12 hours of advanced biomechanics, ground reaction forces, and angular velocities onto a coach in a 2-day weekend seminar and expect long-term retention.
Wait, let me push back on that a bit. Why not? Professionals attend weekend certification seminars all the time, right? They take notes, they pass a test, they get a certificate. Why is a drawn-out 30-day drip of information biologically necessary here?
Because a weekend seminar mostly relies on short-term memory, which quickly decays. Spaced repetition, on the other hand, actively rewires the brain's analytical habits.
Okay, I'm listening.
When a coach learns a highly technical kinematic concept on day one, they need to go out to the driving range, observe their students, and actively look for that specific sequencing flaw. Then, crucially, they need to sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah. Sleep is when the brain consolidates new information and strengthens synapses. By day 30 of this cycle, the coach isn't just recalling data, they have developed a permanent unconscious lens through which they view human movement.
Okay, I see how spaced repetition builds the coach's internal database. But let me push back again on the real-world application. 12 hours of deep-dive biomechanics sounds incredibly dense, even spread over 30 days. How does a coach translate that highly technical data back into simple instructions for an amateur golfer on the driving range who just wants to stop slicing the ball?
That's the real magic of it. The ultimate mark of a master coach is the ability to hide the math.
Hide the math, I like that.
Yeah. The high-tech visual aesthetic of modern software, the dark anthracite backgrounds, the strong blue and neon green eCoach 360 colors, the complex biomechanical overlays, all of that serves the coach's understanding, not the student's.
Right. The amateur doesn't need to see the force plate visuals.
Exactly. The goal of learning advanced biomechanics is to understand the science so deeply that you can distill it into a single, profound physical cue.
So the student never actually hears the phrase vertical ground reaction force.
Never. The coach uses the kinematic data to find the exact bottleneck in the energy transfer. Say the data shows the player isn't pushing into the ground effectively during the downswing.
Right.
The coach processes that biomechanical reality, walks over to the student, and just says, I want you to feel like you are crushing a soda can under your lead heel right before you swing down.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. The technology does the heavy analytical lifting, finding the root cause. But the treatment remains deeply human.
Yes.
An external cue, like crushing a soda can, creates a focus of attention that the amateur's motor system can easily understand and execute.
Making the legendary coach's eye measurable, verifiable, and ultimately just so much more effective.
So if the coach uses this platform to translate complex data into simple physical cues, what is the feedback loop for Henrik as the educator? Like, how does he know he is providing the right data for these coaches to translate?
That's a great point.
Which leads us to the final, and perhaps most disruptive, piece of Henrik's update. He makes a direct call to action, actively asking his listeners to continue leaving comments on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X Twitter.
He is not asking for passive engagement here. He wants the audience to dictate the syllabus.
Exactly. He actively wants the audience to tell him what topics to research, which technologies they are interested in, and what areas of instruction need deeper explanation.
Like what specific movement patterns they struggle with.
Right. And what type of episodes they would like in the future. The ultimate goal is to create the most valuable content for the next generation of golf education.
So what does this all mean? It means you, listening right now, are effectively sitting in the producer's chair for future content.
And this raises an important question about how modern sports science is evolving. It's no longer a top-down lecture.
No, not at all.
Historically, researchers in a sterile university lab would conduct a study, put it behind a paywall, and maybe 5 years later, a watered-down version trickles down to a coach, which lacks ecological validity. Hitting a ball covered in sensors indoors is entirely different from a stressed amateur on a windy driving range.
Exactly. But the feedback loop from coaches in the trenches, encountering real-world, chaotic movement problems every single day, that is what drives the next wave of kinematic research now.
It is the democratization of sports science. And for you listening, whether you are analyzing a golf swing or tackling a complex problem in your own profession, think about how powerful it is to have an expert willing to custom research your specific coaching hurdles or technological curiosities.
It demands an evolution from being a passive consumer to an active participant in your field.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by dismantling the limitations of the naked eye, exposing how it's vulnerable to treating symptoms.
Yeah, treating the symptom instead of the disease.
Right. Then we transitioned from the simple thermometer of ball tracking data to the high-definition body scan of true kinematics and biomechanics.
Mapping that entire chain of energy transfer.
Exactly. And finally, we explored how eCoach 360 Degrees aims to make this accessible, turning overwhelming data into an actionable coaching lens, all driven by this crowdsourced, bottom-up feedback loop. It's all about understanding the why behind the what, whether you're looking at motion analysis graphics or analyzing a spreadsheet at work.
And as we continue to map the exact perfect transfer of energy through the human body, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder.
Oh, let's hear it.
If high-tech biomechanics can map the absolute perfect transfer of energy, will we eventually use this data to find the one universally perfect golf swing? Or will kinematic data ultimately prove that because every human body is built differently, there are a million different perfect ways to swing a club?
Man, that is a great question. True perfection might just be entirely customized. A perfect synthesis of art and science. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the data, keep looking for the root cause, and we will catch you next time.